Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving deep into a world that's, well, pretty tight carbonate reservoirs, that is. Specifically, we're looking at the ARX reservoir in Egypt.
Oh, an interesting one for sure. Lots of challenges down there.
We've got a paper here focusing on one particular well, well X, and it sounds like they really put those engineers through the ringer.
Yeah, I read about that stuck pipe incident. 2,000 feet down a horizontal well. Can you imagine?
Talk about a nail biter.
Yeah.
But before we get to all that drama, let's back up a bit. For those who aren't familiar, what exactly makes these tight carbonates so different from, say, your typical conventional oil reservoir?
Right, good point. Well, you see, in conventional reservoirs, the oil flows pretty easily. Think of it like a nice, free-flowing river. But in tight carbonates, it's a whole different story.
Oh, so not quite so simple.
Nope, not at all. It's more like trying to squeeze oil out of a sponge. The oil's trapped in these tiny little pores, and the fractures are all jumbled up and poorly connected.
So basically, it's a real pain to get the oil out.
You got it. Much harder to extract.
So why bother? Why not stick with the easy oil, if you will?
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? The problem is those conventional reserves they're running out. And the world still needs energy. Lots of it.
True enough. Demand just keeps going up.
Exactly. So we've got to get creative, find ways to tap into these trickier sources. And tight oil, thanks to things like horizontal drilling and all these new stimulation techniques, it's becoming a real contender.
Makes sense. So the ARX reservoir, they tried vertical wells first, right?
Yeah.
And that didn't quite pan out.
Yeah, vertical wells just couldn't cut it. They weren't reaching enough of the oil trapped in those tight formations.
Production just wasn't high enough.
Not even close, not economically viable. So they decided to go horizontal, try to tap into more of the reservoir that way.
And that's where well X comes in over 7,000 feet deep, with a horizontal section stretching over 1,000 feet. That's what, longer than 3 football fields?
Yeah, something like that.
Why go to such lengths, so to speak?
It all comes down to the type of rock they're dealing with dolomite. It's known for its lateral continuity. Think of it like layers of cake stretching out horizontally.
Okay.
So a long horizontal well bore allows them to intersect more of those oil-rich layers you see. More contact, more production.
Like maximizing surface area, kind of like our small intestines with all their folds, right?
Yeah.
More contact, more absorption.
Exactly. And to make things even better, they used a slotted liner completion in well X. It's kind of like a high-tech strainer, lets the oil pass through, but keeps out sand and other gunk that could clog up the well.
Okay, so they've got this super long well bore, a fancy strainer in place, lots of oil just waiting to gush out, right?
If only it were that simple. Dolomite has good lateral continuity, yes, but the connectivity within the reservoir, that's a different story.
Okay, so it's not all smooth sailing.
Not quite. Imagine a honeycomb, right? But with each little cell sealed off, to get to the oil trapped in those pockets, you need to create pathways for it to flow.
Ooh, okay, I see. Honeycomb, that's a great visual. So how do they go about breaking down those walls and getting the oil flowing?
That's where acid stimulation comes in. They pump acid down the well to dissolve some of the rock and create channels for the oil.
That sounds pretty straightforward.
You'd think so. But in the case of well X, it was anything but. There were high temperatures down there, depletion, and this whole issue of potential water breakthrough.
Oh, right. I remember reading about that in the paper. Makes things a bit more complicated.
A bit more, yeah. You see, the ARX reservoir, it has a high gas-to-oil ratio. And to keep that gas dissolved, they use water flooding.
Okay, so what's the problem?
Well, if the acid dissolves the rock in the wrong places, it could create a pathway for that water to flood the well instead of oil.
I see. So it's like accidentally poking a hole in your juice box, huh? Not the outcome you're looking for.
Exactly. They need to make sure the acid only dissolves the right parts of the rock, very precise. And remember that stuck coiled tubing we talked about?
Oh, yeah, that doesn't sound good.
Yeah, that added a whole new dimension to the challenge. But we'll save that story for part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay, so picture this. We've got this pipe stuck thousands of feet down, a horizontal well, in a formation that's already a nightmare to stimulate. And to top it all off, we're constantly on edge about this water breakthrough thing. Sounds like a recipe for disaster. What did the engineers even do at that point? Like, how do you even approach a re-acidizing job with all those obstacles?
Oh, it was a tricky one, all right. They knew they couldn't just use the stuck coiled tubing to deliver the acid. That was out of the question. And they needed to get that acid deeper into the well this time around.
Right, so no relying on that stuck pipe anymore. What were the options? Did they ever consider throwing in the towel? Just abandoning the well? Or was there still some hope?
Well, giving up wasn't really an option, so they had to think outside the box, get a little creative with, well, with chemical diverters.
Chemical diverters, what are those? Feels like something out of Star Trek.
Yeah, a bit sci-fi, I guess. There are these specialized chemicals, you see, that you pump down the well. And what they do is they actually redirect the acid flow, make sure it goes where it needs to, reaches those tougher, less permeable zones.
Okay, so like redirecting traffic,
Yeah.
making the acid take a detour. How do these chemical diverters work?
Think of it this way. Imagine you've got a garden hose. You know, the kind with all the little holes poked in it.
Yeah, I get it.
So if you just turn on the water, it'll just spray out of the closest holes, right? But if you plug up those first few holes, the water has to go further down the hose. It's forced out of those holes further away.
So it's like strategically plugging up those easy pathways, forcing the acid to travel deeper. Pretty clever, huh?
Exactly. But of course, it's not as simple as just dumping some mystery goo down there. They had to be very strategic about it. The key was understanding the reservoir, you see, and then optimizing the pumping rate for those diverters.
So it's a balancing act. Didn't they use some software modeling for that, just like in their first attempt?
They did. And they learned from their mistakes, that's for sure. The model actually showed that pumping the diverter too quickly, well, it could backfire, reduce its effectiveness.
Too much of a good thing can be bad. So what, like the faster you pump it, the less effective it is?
It's not quite that simple, but yeah, basically think about pouring a thick liquid really fast. It tends to clump up instead of spreading out evenly.
Yeah, like pancake batter, dump it all in at once, and you just end up with a lumpy mess.
Uh-huh. Perfect analogy. So the trick was to pump the diverter slowly, give it time to react with the formation, and create a nice uniform barrier.
Okay, so slow and steady wins the race, right? But what kind of chemical diverter did they use this time? Was it the same one from the first attempt?
Nope, they went with something different. A viscoelastic diverting agent. VDA for short.
VDA. Sounds fancy.
That's pretty cool stuff. It starts out as a low viscosity fluid, so it's easy to pump down the well. But then, get this, when it reacts with the formation, it actually forms a gel.
Whoa, a gel, like those toys kids play with. You add water to the powder and it turns into slime.
Exactly. And once it forms that gel, it's like a barrier, you see, redirecting the acid flow. And the best part, it breaks down naturally after the treatment's done. No permanent plugging.
Nice. So no lasting damage. Yeah. All right, so they've got their slow and steady strategy, their magical shape-shifting slime. Talk me through the actual procedure. How did they pull this reacidizing job off?
Right. So first, they very carefully, very slowly ran the coiled tubing down to the end of the vertical section. That's about 5,500 feet down.
And remember, the pipe's still stuck further down, so they had to be extra careful.
Oh, absolutely. Couldn't risk making things worse.
Yeah.
Then they pumped in about 200 barrels of that VDA, mixed with some hydrochloric acid, but they did it very slowly, like only 3/4 of a barrel per minute.
Slow and steady. I bet everyone was holding their breath at this point, hoping they wouldn't hit another snag.
Oh, I'm sure they were. But then, good news, the pressure reading started to climb. That was a good sign. Meant the VDA was doing its job, creating that resistance.
So they were pushing against that gel barrier.
Exactly. It was in place, working its magic. After that, they flushed the coiled tubing with potassium chloride water just to clean things out a bit. And then came the main event, 500 barrels of 15% hydrochloric acid. Pumped it right in there to dissolve that rock and create all those flow paths.
So they created the pathways. What happened next? Did they pull out the coiled tubing and call it a day?
Not quite yet. Just to be sure, make sure everything went smoothly, they pumped in a mutual solvent to break down that VDA, remember? And then more potassium chloride water just to flush everything out nice and clean.
So it was a multi-step process, huh? Precisely planned and executed. But the big question is, did it work? Did all this effort actually pay off? All right, so we followed the story of Well X, it's been a roller coaster. From that stuck pipe to this meticulously planned reacidizing job. Now, for the big reveal, did all that effort pay off? Did they actually manage to bring this well back to life? They did. It was a huge success, actually. The well responded really well to the treatment. Okay, but what does that even mean? Give me some numbers here. How much of an improvement are we talking?
So before they did the reacidizing, Well X had a productivity index of, just 3 barrels of oil per psi. But afterwards, it jumped up to 10.
Hold on, 10? That's what, like 3 times the initial productivity? We're not talking about a small bump here. This is a complete turnaround.
Yeah.
So this VDA stuff, that viscoelastic diverting agent, that was the key, wasn't it?
It definitely played a big role. By controlling that pumping rate, nice and slow, and using that VDA to redirect the acid, they were able to stimulate a much bigger area of the reservoir.
It's like they gave the well a whole new set of roads. Let all that oil flow freely. What about the long term, though? Was this just a temporary boost, or did Well X keep up this impressive performance?
Oh, the results were definitely sustained. The well kept producing at a good rate, economically viable, for quite a while. The paper actually has some graphs comparing the long-term production of Well X to those vertical wells nearby. The difference is pretty striking.
I bet. A real testament to the power of horizontal drilling and these advanced stimulation techniques. Even in these really tough, tight carbonate reservoirs, it shows you can find a way to unlock their potential.
What's really interesting, though, is that it wasn't just about brute force, just pumping in more acid at higher pressure. It was about understanding the reservoir, using those modeling tools, and choosing the right approach.
Brains and brawn, huh? A little bit of both. It just goes to show you, when you're faced with a challenge, sometimes you got to get creative, adapt, find new solutions. But it also makes me wonder, if this is what we can do now, what's next? What other breakthroughs are just around the corner for tight oil production?
Now, that's an exciting question. Who knows what the future holds? Technology keeps advancing, right? There's so much potential out there. Maybe we'll be able to unlock even more of these unconventional resources someday.
It's pretty inspiring to think about. Maybe one of our listeners out there will be the one to make those next big breakthroughs, huh? It's a field that's constantly changing, pushing boundaries.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Well X and the whole world of tight carbonate reservoirs. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the geology to the engineering challenges.
It's been quite the journey. I learned a lot, that's for sure. This whole case study, it just shows you what's possible with a bit of ingenuity, human spirit of innovation, finding ways to overcome even the toughest obstacles.
We hope you found it inspiring, too. And maybe it sparked some curiosity.
Exactly. Keep exploring, keep learning, keep those questions coming. Who knows what fascinating discoveries are waiting out there? Until next time, happy diving, everyone.